Today's sermon marks the end of about a month's worth of sermons that Beth and I have been doing to consider what it means to fully embrace and love our LGBTQIA brothers and sisters, children, family, friends. And today, to sort of help us out, last week, Beth very helpfully provided an insert with some things to consider. I've provided this week a sermon reflection sheet because I'm going to be going over some Hebrew words that are hard to follow along with. And so I have them written out with their definitions when we come to that part. But it also gives you a chance to write down thoughts that occur to you and your reflections on it. So at any rate, I invite you to indeed take out your pencils and pens and write and scratch and doodle if that helps too. Some people think best when they're doodling, so doodle away if you need to. Well, as a pastor and preacher and someone educated and trained in the study and interpretation of the scriptures and Christian history and tradition, I actually take it as my role and responsibility to address questions and issues that arise concerning our faith tradition in all its complexity and breadth of development over the centuries. Now, I do that very imperfectly because I don't know everything that has happened, other than to say it's broad and it's complex. It is not simple. And the times we live in are also broad and complex times. And so, from time to time, we need to engage in deeper discussion and consideration about what it is that we believe and how it is we live out our faith. This often gets reflected in rather lively and heartfelt conversations in study groups, conversations, and so on. And from time to time, there have arisen in some conversations questions expressed by people that we haven't had time to address satisfactorily. So today I would like to begin to address one of the questions that has actually arisen quite a few times, and that is the issue of gender identity, sexuality, and our faith life as followers of Jesus Christ. And first off, I want you to know that when you talk about transgendered persons, LGBTQ persons, you're talking about members of my family. So this has a personal edge to it. In the larger extended family of my 7 brothers and our families, there are 4 persons who identify as transgender, 1 person who identifies as bisexual, 1 person identifies as non-binary, and there may actually be 2 or 3 who identify that way. 1 identifies as non-binary and asexual, and many of us actually are dissatisfied with the constrictions that the so-called traditional gender roles place upon us as intelligent, creative, and, frankly, complex human beings. So, how can I not love my family members the same as I always have? How can I love any of them any less than any others? So I ask you to wade with me in the waters of gender and spirituality this morning. I should have cued you for a little music there, wade in the waters, but if okay. Anyway, we're going to wade in the waters of gender and spirituality this morning, waters that I've actually waded in for many years, theoretically, but which became very personal just in the last few years. So let me share with you what I have discovered as I have tried to understand this from the viewpoint of a parent as well as a person steeped in the study of the Bible and the Christian and other religious traditions, in fact. But also as a person who has training and education in the biological sciences. Therefore, the two basic questions that I would invite you to consider today are these. First, what is the path of love, compassion, and companionship that Jesus exemplified in being in relationship with LGBTQIA persons? And second, what goes beyond the political divisions that some have deliberately created in order to divide society into factions and instead upholds models of a beloved community? Those are two questions. Two questions. So let's take a look for a moment at what gender is all about. Gender. The binary characteristics that have dominated ideas of gender are all related to the ability to reproduce, to impregnate or become pregnant, and to bear children. Binary gender identities, male and female, are tied strictly to a biological function that in most societies was also tied to property, to progeny to carry on lineages and dynasties, as well as caring for the elderly and wealth. We find this reflected in the Genesis stories, the Genesis creation stories particularly. Those stories say, all created beings are to be fruitful and multiply. Well, how do they do that? Well, instead of simply dividing in two, like single-cell organisms, and here I have to tell a joke that my brother made up one time. What did the single-cell animal say when it split in two? Hey, look. There's a pair of me, see? See, that wasn't mine. That was my brother. Don't go away, folks. They don't get any better. But we don't actually do that, becoming clones of ourselves. Animal and plant species were created and evolved with the ability to create replicates of one half of themselves, which is then shared with a complementary half from another individual of their own species, which grows into an offspring of the two genetic donors. So this is the first function of what we call gender, to reproduce and carry on the species. And all this reflects reproductive strategies rooted in the fact that we are biological beings. If you don't believe that, hit yourself on the head. You'll feel something, right? If you don't, we'll have a conversation later. We're biological beings, and so this is sort of the bedrock. But Jewish teachers and scholars 2,000 years ago recognized other manifestations of gender. Okay, this is not something last week, not something 10 years ago, 2,000 years ago. The Talmud, which is a huge and authoritative compendium of Jewish legal traditions, contains, in fact, no less than 8 gender designations. And now here's where you can follow along in the sermon reflection sheet. First is Zakar, which is also referred to in the Bible as Ish. In fact, Ish is usually the pronoun that is male. Okay? What we would call male. And then there is Nekava, or Isha, which is for female. Then the third reflects the fact that 2,000 years ago, the Talmud was written actually in a Greek as well as Latin-speaking world. And that's androgynos, where we get the word androgynous, okay? Having both male and female characteristics. Then there was a fourth category that they called tumtum, which was a person who lacked sexual characteristics of either kind. Fifth is Eilanit Chama, which that person was identified female at birth, but later naturally developed male characteristics. And then there was Eilanit Adam, which that person was identified female at birth, but later developed male characteristics through human intervention. I don't know how they did that 2,000 years ago. I'm a biologist, but not a history of biology-ist, whatever. Then there is Saris Chama, which a person was identified male at birth, but later naturally developed female characteristics. And then the eighth was Saris Adam, which this person was identified male at birth and later developed female characteristics through human intervention. Now, please notice that all these categories are still reflective of concerns around reproduction and producing heirs and so on. And these categories are probably what Jesus was referring to, particularly that last category, when he said there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. So even at that time, Jesus is referring and recognizing that in the culture in which he lived, people recognized different gender characteristics and expressions. But in recent times, self-identity has moved beyond such biological and economically driven and defined categories. The issue goes deeper into such questions as, what does it mean to be human? Am I a human first and then a gendered being? Or am I first a gendered being, which then defines how human or what kind of human I am? Who am I at the deepest levels of my being? These are not trivial questions. These are bedrock questions. For millennia, humans were primarily defined in crudely economic terms. childbearer, property, possession, slave, servant, worker, laborer, field hand, serf, peasant, conscript, cannon fodder, boots on the ground, workforce, cogs in the machine, foot soldiers, pawns, and so on. You recognize those terms? Not much about being human, is there, in that? But there have been cries and objections to this reductionism into reproductive classifications. And we find them in Scripture. For instance, Psalm 8. If you want to pull out a Bible and turn to Psalm 8, you can follow along real quickly, but verses 3 through 5 say, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are humans? You're mindful of them. Mortals, that you care for them. Yet, you have made them a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor." Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16. "For it was you who formed my inward parts, who knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance." Little less than God. And yet, we love stuffing people into boxes. Jesus points out that our physical dimorphism and genderedness falls away in the life to come. In his arguments with certain scribes and Sadducees who try to trap him in a question about levirate marriage. And a levirate marriage was the custom that if the oldest son in a family died, who was married, died before he had children, it was the job of the next son to marry his wife and produce children. And so the Sadducees and Pharisees got together and tried to trick Jesus into dealing with that question. Jesus actually replies to their question by saying, "You are wrong because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection, people neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels of God in heaven." What he's saying is our dimorphic physical characteristics that we label male and female are simply for the purpose of carrying on the species. But our religious traditions, the teachings of Jesus and others, tell us that we're all very, very much more than physical beings endlessly reproducing. We are not bacteria and cockroaches. There's more to our life than simply reproducing. Who we are, our essential identities are little less than God and the divine beings. So the religious quest, the religious journey, the spiritual journey, is to probe deeply into these deeper identities. What does it mean to be human? How does my inner life relate to and find expression in my outer life? These are the questions of human beings created in the image of God, endowed with minds to think, hearts to feel deeply, souls to act with integrity, and spirits to communicate with the divine source of our being. And so because we are spiritually endowed beings, our greatest glory is to create communities and societies based upon the vision and wisdom of God. In the last 2 centuries, that idea has been expressed in terms of creating the beloved community. You've probably heard that term, the beloved community. And the beloved community is based scripturally in the many commandments that Jesus continually gave to love one another. Go through the Bible and just highlight every time Jesus says to love. Add them up. To love is to act on behalf of another. That's a basic definition of love. To act on behalf of another. To do that which is in the best interests of the other as that person defines those interests. Do you hear that? You're familiar, of course, with the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Many people have said that doesn't go far enough, and it presumes that you know what the other person really needs. And so there has been a reformulation into what's called the platinum rule, and that is do unto others as they would have you do unto them. Do you hear that difference? To do that, you have to be in connection with them. You have to be in relationship with them. You have to listen. That's the kind of love that really Jesus manifested. He would go out into the community and people would come up to him and he would say, "What do you need from me?" He didn't say, "Oh, here, take this care package and go home." He'd say, "What is it that you need? Tell me. Speak to me." So when I listen to and interact with my transgendered family members, what they ask of me is to respect who they know themselves to be. And they ask me to receive them as they understand themselves to be on the inside. It's not my place to judge them, but to love them and to accept them for who they tell me they are. It's not my place to tell them that they are this or that. This is who they want me to know them as. And so I will make the adjustments in my own mental world to see them as they present themselves to me. And because I love them, I will do the work to change my language accordingly. And I want to tell you, it ain't easy. Right? Particularly if someone, particularly a child, you have viewed them and thought about them and used certain pronouns and oftentimes certain names for decades. To switch But it's an act of love to make the effort. And if you stumble and say, "I'm sorry," 99% of the time, they will say, "It's all right. Keep working." It's an act of love. The platinum rule of loving tells me to make the effort. So I will. And it's not easy to rearrange our understanding of who these persons are, especially with the pronouns. But as in all things in life, these transitions, these changes, these developments, and self-discoveries involve loss and grieving. But there are also new discoveries. There's things that are gained, and often greater happiness and contentment with the affirmation of who a person who trusts us enough to share their self-understanding with us, of who that person is. And these persons are our children, our nieces and nephews, cousins, friends, schoolmates, children of the cousins of our classmates, you name it. There's not an us versus them. We're all us. We're all family. We are all part of God's beloved family. And Jesus has commanded us to love one another because we recognize and claim membership in God's worldwide family as beloved children all. We are the children of love. And so we're commanded, called, required, expected, cajoled to love one another, to love other persons, all persons with the love that Jesus demonstrated to us. That Jesus demonstrated. So I love my transgendered family members. I love my non-binary family members. I love my asexual offspring. I love all my LGBTQ family members and friends and associates and colleagues. What else can I do as a follower of the great preacher of love? I invite you to do the same. Amen.